There's a lot of work being done right now around really metabolite specific probiotics. One, for example, was discovered, this particular company was looking for a probiotic that produced GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA. So they screened using, AI and high throughput screening 200 million strains of probiotics, the probiotic bacteria, you know, and they found several. Then they were able to test them, and they found one organism that in the gut produces 100 milligrams of GABA. It's amazing. So the nice thing is it's been shown in now 2 clinical trials to reduce stress and anxiety in companion animals, and the human trials running. And so 200 million different strains they sorted through to find this. And fortunately, we've now got the computing power where we can do those kinds of things. So I think that the future is the very condition specific probiotics, genetically modifying organisms to do things. For example, there's a company that I'm actually affiliated with. They've genetically modified a spore former to not go into its spore form, because when it's active in the stomach is where they want it to be active. It produces an enzyme, and that enzyme breaks down the material that causes kidney stones. It's a strange but brilliant and elegant approach to, producing this enzyme that's super frail. I couldn't just give you the enzyme, but I can give you this organism that will produce the enzyme in the stomach and in the gut, and will, reduce your incidences of kidney stones.
Hello, Michael. You are the co-founder and managing partner of Growthways and former CEO of Ganadian Biotech, a company that revolutionized shelf-stable probiotics. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So, Michael, you have been working with probiotics for decades, for many years, anyway, decades. So let's just start right at the beginning. So how would you define what a probiotic is?
Well, a probiotic, it's interesting. I mean, it's one of those few ingredients that has a real definition. And so the WHO considers a probiotic a live microorganism that confers a benefit on the host when delivered in adequate amounts. And so really a probiotic is a live bacteria or fungi that when you consume it, it's alive, it continues to grow and flourish in the gut, and it actually provides a benefit for the consumer. So it's a real clear-cut definition.
So have you seen the probiotic market evolving? I mean,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
So I entered the market in 2006. I went to work for a company where I was doing a consulting project with them to look at their IP, and I said, "Wow, you've got a really interesting organism here. I know nothing about probiotics, but they seem pretty interesting." Back in 2006 is about the time when Danone and Jamie Lee Curtis were making all kinds of news, and they were promoting the Activia line of products. And that really, I mean, the entire industry owes a debt of gratitude to the work that Danone did and through that campaign. But so I got into the industry, and really so the company I joined, Ganadian, had a line of capsules and tablets, standard probiotic products for various ailments, in about 50,000 stores throughout the United States. But I really saw the market in our particular instance as being food and beverage. When we talked to consumers, they said, "We love probiotics. We don't want to always have to take yogurt. We don't always want to take a capsule or a tablet. Just give it to us. If we need to take it every day," which you do, you need to take a probiotic every day. "If we need to do it every day, can you make it easier on us?" And so our goal was to put our probiotic into food and beverage products and companion animal products that are consumed on a regular basis. So we didn't want to have to turn somebody into a kombucha drinker or turn somebody into a yogurt drinker. We wanted people to be able to have a cup of tea and put a probiotic in it, or a capsule, or a gummy, or a whatever. So we found that the particular organism that we were working with at the time allowed us to do that. But what we saw in the market was the drive of probiotic fortified yogurts started taking over the kind of non-fortified yogurts that were just yogurt. And there's a difference. And so there's yogurt that just has, it's yogurt by the very nature of the fact that some bacteria turn some milk or something into yogurt. And then you have the ones that are fortified with clinically studied probiotic strains. And so that's kind of where we got involved, which is the deeply clinically studied, supported strains that were a food ingredient first, and then the regulatory channels. It depends on each country, but the regulatory channel allowed us to take it into food and beverage, and it just worked. But key is that we spent the time, energy, and money doing outside third-party random placebo-controlled trials to show that if you're going to take this probiotic and you think it's going to help you for this particular issue that you're having, and we had the clinical data, we wanted the consumers to feel comfortable to know that what's in their product is what's been studied and it's exactly the same. Because in the world of probiotics, and we'll get into this in a little bit, in the world of probiotics, it can get really confusing. And because there's a huge difference between one probiotic that may look very similar or almost exactly similar to another probiotic, it may do something completely different or nothing at all. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing things right. And so the probiotic industry has evolved immensely since then. Since then, we have lots of big players. There's been some big consolidation. There are great brands on the market. There are thousands, literally thousands and thousands of probiotic fortified foods, beverages, and supplements in the market. Companion animal products are doing very well with probiotics. Dog and cat owners love probiotics because there's all kinds of great benefits depending on the strain. And so, but like I said, everything's strain dependent, and so it really depends on what the consumer is looking for.
Okay, so there's definitely something to unpack in there. But what I'd like to do is to kind of start from, if I want to, I feel I want to take a probiotic. You said you should take one every day, and I
Sure.
feel like I want to, but so far I'm not taking one, let's say. But the market is complicated. And as you said, there's many strains, and the strains have long Latin names that are difficult to remember, not
Mhm.
to and pronounce. Um, and it's not easy to actually assess my current state
Yep.
because the gut, how is my gut microbiome? So,
Mhm.
how should someone approach taking a probiotic for the first time? How would you think about
Mhm.
what to look for?
So let's take one step back to Probiotics 101. So if I'm a consumer, and I give this advice to people all the time, if I'm a consumer, we want to look at probiotics. So it should be labeled on the package. Whatever it is you're buying should have it labeled. And probiotics are identified by their genus, their species, and then their strain. And so to kind of put that in perspective, if you can imagine a car, the genus may be Honda, the species may be Accord, and the strain may be EXL, whatever. And there can be a pretty big difference between a Honda Accord L and an EXL. So in the probiotic world, to put this into kind of context, um, a number of years ago, a university studied, they sequenced 100 strains of a particular organism called Lactobacillus rhamnosus. There's a very, very well studied and good selling product on the market called Culturelle. It contains a probiotic called Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. So they used kind of that Lactobacillus GG as let's just call it the baseline. And then they tested 99 other strains of Lactobacillus rhamnosus, and then they found that these strains were anywhere from 99.99% similar to Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG to 86% similar. So the confusion then lies where a consumer says, I heard I should take Lactobacillus rhamnosus. You may be taking one that does nothing. You may be taking one, so what's really key if I'm a consumer and I'm giving advice to consumer, it is make sure that you have the genus, the species, and the strain. If you see on a label Lactobacillus acidophilus and it says just that, we can leave that on the shelf. Because what that is it's just kind of a maybe a generic strain. And so what it's telling the consumer is that company that's selling you that probiotic doesn't care to inform you what the actual ingredient you're about to ingest is. The legitimate and the good companies follow the International Probiotics Association labeling guidelines where they use the genus, the species, and the strain. And what's important um, is when you look at things, you'll see there's two different ways probiotics will be labeled. And so the unit of measure for a probiotic is called a CFU. That's a colony forming unit. So that's like if it's, and you'll see, say 1 billion CFU. That means that 1 billion individual cells of that organism can form a colony, can grow. They can grow and then, multiply. So you measure that, and the key for a consumer is it doesn't matter what's in it when they make it. What matters is what's going to be there when you consume it. If it's the last day of the shelf life, what's in there? And so the labeling standards say you should use the genus, the species, and the strain, and you should have the CFU count or whatever the standard is at time of consumption at the end of shelf life. So basically, you don't want to. So you'll see things labeled. It'll have Lactobacillus acidophilus 10 billion CFU, and then asterisk at time of manufacture. There could be 0 CFU when you actually consume it, or 10 or 100. And it's one of the few products on the market where you buy it. So if you went out and bought a Samsung TV and it said, it's 4K at time of purchase, and you bring it home, and by the time you get it home, it's 360K, because you would be a pretty disappointed consumer. But when it comes to the probiotic world, we don't know that because, most of us don't have really nice microbiology labs in our home to be able to, do colony counts. And so consumers should look at genus, species, and strain, and at time of or end of shelf life CFU counts.
Okay, so a couple of things. How is the strain normally documented? Like, is it a name?
Yeah, so when you discover a new strain, so back in the day, for example, we discovered this new strain, and it had never been discovered before. So we actually, you deposit that strain. You kind of like put your hand up and say, "This is mine." I deposit it in these giant bacterial repositories that exist around the world, and it's then characterized. And so that strain is for all the future. That strain will be known as, this particular genus, species, and strain designation. So we all know in the industry, we know that if it says it's this, we should be able to test it genetically and know that that is what it is. And so that's just kind of a standard part of quality control that quality probiotic companies use these days, where it's, if they're using the genus, the species, and the strain, you should be able to identify it. You should be able to test for it and test, how much is in there.
Okay, and the strain would be, I mean, so you said Lactobacillus rhinoceros or whatever,
Lactobacillus
rhamnoceros,
rhamnosus, and then the strain
rhamnosus.
designation, for example, acidophilus. A lot
Ah,
of
right.
consumers have heard of acidophilus. So Lactobacillus acidophilus, that's the genus and the species. So the species is acidophilus. The strain is what matters. So you'll have a Lactobacillus acidophilus, but the strain, for example, there's a strain called NCFM. So that's their strain designation. It was discovered by people, and they named it Lactobacillus acidophilus NCFM. So if a consumer goes out and searches the internet for that particular genus, species, and strain, which is very easy to do, it will bring up all of the clinical studies that have been done on that particular strain. If you put in a probiotic into Google or wherever, and nothing shows up, it's probably because it doesn't exist and it's some sort of kind of made up name.
Okay.
So it should be the way we have things now as an industry. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for consumers to be able to, take their own healthcare in their own hands and look and see what kind of data is out there. It's obviously it's complicated, but fortunately we have the ability to put some claims on the package. And so you can say, supports this strain supports digestive health or immune health, or or now we're starting to see strains. The current trend, so the evolution of the probiotic industry has been digestive and then immune, and now you're starting to see things for all sorts of very specific needs. And it's amazing what's going on in the marketplace right now. You're seeing the gut-brain axis being addressed through probiotics, stress, mood, depression, things like that, protein metabolism, things like the ability to control um, the formation of kidney stones or the reduction of the symptoms of gout, things like that. I mean, there are probiotics that are clinically been shown to work very, very well for those types of things. And you could put it in a food product because the way they're regulated is as a food ingredient, at least in the US. Other places they're regulated as other things, but they're typically regulated as kind of food ingredients or supplement ingredients, not pharmaceutical.
For me, feeling my best means being both focused and genuinely calm, pushing hard and operating at full capacity, but without the stress. A non-negotiable part of this is keeping my magnesium at the optimum level. That's why I choose Magnesium Breakthrough from BiOptimizers. It helps me get deeper, better quality sleep and supports my body recovery after training, and I can stay calm and focused throughout the day. Why Magnesium Breakthrough? Most supplements contain only one or two types of magnesium, while Magnesium Breakthrough is the only full spectrum supplement that contains all 7 forms of magnesium your body needs in one capsule. If you want to try Magnesium Breakthrough, go to bioptimizers.com/modern and enter the promo code MODERN10 to get 10% off any order. They even offer a full 365-day money-back guarantee, so there's zero risk to trying it. And if you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you will make sure your monthly supply is guaranteed. Thank you for your support. So one other thing to go back to, so when we take like a supplement like NMN or something, you can get the company that makes it can get a third-party lab to look at it and say, okay, it has this purity, and then they can put that on their website. Is there such a thing for probiotics? And would there be something that would be able to confirm the CFU count?
Typically for supplements, yes. There's a website called consumerlab.com, and Consumer Lab does a really nice job of actually testing using existing protocols. They test probiotic products and MSM, glucosamine, all kinds of stuff. So it's a great resource for consumers. But yes, the ability to test things should, and so on the label, it should say how many CFU and whether it's at time of manufacture, at time of consumption. And I place a good deal of trust if someone says that from the knowing the industry as well as I do, I put a good deal of trust in people putting, if it has this strain and this many CFU and it says at time of consumption or at end of shelf life, it's usually pretty good. Unless somebody left it in the trunk of their car for, during the summer and they're heat sensitive and things like that. So you can't just leave your probiotics out in the yard and then go grab them. But overall, as long as they're well maintained, now there's been so many technologies that have helped um, protect the organism so that it's not, so you don't have to refrigerate all probiotics now. It used to be back in the day, like they were like, put your probiotic in a refrigerator, it dies immediately. And now they've developed cryoprotectants so that like when it's fermented, they actually have ways to just help it make it through the freeze drying process and stabilize it so that it's a nice stable organism.
Okay, so in general, the bacteria is in some kind of dormant state when it's sitting on the shelf, and then when it comes
It's
in, yeah.
Yeah, it's live, but it's like you said, it's just kind of waiting around to be activated and to give it something to do. There's different types of probiotics. There's lactic acid probiotics, and then there's um, then there's spore forming probiotics. And so you have, and spore forming probiotics do produce lactic acid, but um, LABs typical, like if you have a lactobacillus or a bifidobacteria or things like that, they require a different type of storage than things when you see bacillus coagulans, bacillus subtilis, bacillus clausii, things like that. Bacillus are spore formers, and so those, when during the manufacturing process, they actually take that spore, which is analogous to a seed, and they actually force it to go into its dormant state. So normally they're just like a regular probiotic cell, and they do their thing, and they're like they're growing and multiplying. But you can force it to go into its spore form, and so they're stable for very long periods of time. And some are stable in amazing environments. I mean, they're finding spores at the bottom of the bottom of the deepest part of the ocean. They're finding them in lava and coming out of, volcanoes and things. And so there's all kinds of different spores, and that's been it's something nature developed to make sure that the organism can survive to do what it's supposed to do.
which is make more of itself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and produce metabolites. It's
Yeah,
because just duplicating is one thing, but doing something while you're duplicating is pretty important.
right. Would you be able to see from the label whether it's a spore forming or a regular type of probiotic?
Sure. So, like I said, the thing you'd want to look for if you're looking for a spore former, the beginning word, the genus would be Bacillus. And so, if you see Bacillus, it's a spore former. It may say spore former. They may use the word spore or stable or something like that. But typically, you'll just look at it and you'll see it's a shelf stable probiotic. It's of the genus Bacillus, and they more commonly than not, they're used in food and beverage products. They're used in some supplements, but they're real. If you're making a supplement, you could use lots of different types of organisms. If you're going to make something that requires anything other than a very, very stable environment, then the best bet to go with is a spore former, because you could put a spore former in tea, or you could put it in cereal, or you could put it in milk or kombucha or whatever, fruit chews, whatever you want. It's why you'll see, for example, in companion animal, you're starting to see more and more use of spore formers, because there's a great benefit for companion animals, but it's really hard to get lactic acid bacteria through the really harsh process that's involved in making dog kibble. It's not something for the weak. You need a strong, viable organism.
Right. Um, so you talked about so you can get probiotics in so many different ways, and I had not really thought about probiotic fortified foods before. So what are kind of the advantages to taking it as a supplement or finding a food that has the probiotic you want?
It's really what works for your lifestyle, there's so many things that, we, like I said, we need to take a probiotic every day. And if you need to, and there's one thing that we found with consumers when we look at compliance to supplements, and I don't know about you, but I do not go through every 30-day supply of supplement that I have in 30 days. Sometimes I miss a day. I try not to. I'm pretty, it's what I do for a living, so I'm pretty religious about my supplement consumption, but I rarely forget to eat. And so what we found with consumers was is if you give them enough options for people that really want to have probiotics in their life, and maybe they're traveling and they want to carry some bars that happen to be fortified with a stable probiotic, or stick packs for a beverage. They want to carry something with them so that they can throw it in their bottle of water, shake it up, and they have something that tastes better, that they like. So it's really consumer preference, because you can buy spore formers in supplements and in food, but it's more difficult. Outside of things like yogurt, it's more difficult to find traditional probiotics in food and beverage products. They're typically relegated to supplement and supplement-like products, just due to their inherent instability.
Right, because there are some that are anaerobic or whatever, and they kind of they need to be inside like a proper
Oh
capsule.
yeah, well, and the anaerobes are also interesting because I mean, you'll have there's two, there's different types of bacteria. There's some that grow in the small intestine where you've got oxygen, and then you have some that grow in the large intestine where you don't have oxygen, and then you have others like, for example, some spore formers are what's called a facultative anaerobe, so it grows in the small and large intestine, and so. So a lot of that has to do with when you're researching your probiotics, what do you want it for? If you're looking for, great immune benefits, you may want to have something that works a little lower down in the gut, or if you're having, maybe you're having carbohydrate malabsorption issues, or you're having troubles with, metabolizing different foods, you may want to be closer up into the small intestine. So, and the nice thing is if you research the organisms, you kind of get a pretty good feel for what works for you. If you're looking for general health, there's a couple of probiotics that I recommend to people. I'm like, if you're just looking to take a probiotic every day and you want to take a capsule every day, here's some that are great. If you have something specific that you're looking for, then you need to look a little deeper.
We talked about the FDA and the kind of what you can say about probiotics. So are they well? So I guess are they regulated by the FDA? And are there any that are approved as drugs, or are they all kind of supplements?
So there have been some that have been attempting to go the pharmaceutical, the RX path. Most probiotics are regulated as a food ingredient. And so we have this, and it's been in the news lately. They're talking about the GRAS process. GRAS meaning it's generally regarded as safe. And to go through that process, what a company will do is they will do toxicology work, they'll do safety work. It's basically similar to what you would do in a phase 1 trial, but you don't have to do it with humans. And so you can do the safety work. And now there's so much that you can do from a computational side. You can really look at the safety, profile based on the genomics of an organism. But so first thing you do is a company will work and they'll assemble an independent panel of experts who will review that data. And if they agree with that data, they'll sign off on it and say, we consider this to be generally regarded as safe. Then you take that document to the FDA and they review it, and they don't say, yes, it's safe. What they say is there are no if they approve it, they'll say there's no objections to this at this time. They always have the right to come back, if we find something in the future. But it is a regulated pathway that is actually kind of expensive and pretty time consuming. So, people talk about it being an unregulated industry. I'm like, man, just spent, $5 million to get a new organism to market. Seems pretty regulated. And when it comes to claims, there really aren't FDA approved claims. And so what the way claims work is the manufacturer of the ingredient, food ingredient, supplement ingredient, whatever it may be, is responsible to have the data to support their claims. And if they get called on it by either the FTC or the FDA, because maybe the FDA will view a claim as a drug claim, because that's what they're really concerned about. They're like, if you're going to have a supplement, but don't claim to cure, prevent, or treat a disease. And so there's certain things that are kind of in that gray line. For example, inflammation. In some circles, inflammation is actually considered a disease. And so you can't say on your probiotic, if that's the case, you can't say on your label of your probiotic reduces inflammation, reduces C-reactive protein, or whatever those types of things. It may do it. It may do it very, very well, but you can't really say anything about it on the label. You can do the clinical studies if you like. You just can't put it on your labels and discuss it on your website and things like that, because that's considered a claim. And so, and the FDA will come to you and they'll say, we believe you're making inappropriate claims, stop it. and they'll give you a warning letter, give you a period of time to stop it. The FTC, on the other hand, can actually levy fines, and those fines can be, as much as all of the revenue you've ever produced since you started making that, that quote unquote false claim. And so, I think that and plus the industry is doing a relatively good job of self-policing, setting standards, and the industry does like I said, a pretty good job of when things are not going right, trying to make sure that that the bad players go away or are fixed.
So is there a probiotic industry body? And who is
Yeah,
that?
so at one point I was actually the president of the board of the International Probiotic Association. It's a fabulous association. Most major probiotic companies in the world belong to it. And so it's the internationalprobiotics.org, I believe is the website. There's also another organization called ISAP, which focuses on, so the IPA, the International Probiotics Association, is more of a standard setting and advocacy group, and it does a lot of work around regulatory work around the world. We're basically, because you can go to one country and a probiotic is a food ingredient, you go to another country and a probiotic may be a drug. And so we're trying to kind of harmonize that around the globe. ISAP is more focused on probiotics and prebiotics and the science and the standards and things like that. And so we have two really strong organizations within the industry that everybody that should participate, or all the big players are participating, and they're all at the table.
Cool. Okay, so going back into a bit of detail. So we talked about colony forming units, CFUs. There's another measure that some people use. With,
AFU.
yeah, AFU. What does AFU stand for?
So the AFU, uh, I'm drawing a blank on what the AFU stands for, but I'll tell you what it means. So
Okay.
what they're saying is AFU counts that the cell is there, that there's a cell, and that it could be viable, even though it may not. The problem is AFU basically says there's a billion cells in there. And so, but CFU says there's a billion cells that we got to grow, so they would benefit you. AFU is a little bit, in my personal opinion, AFU is little bit misleading because it can count dead cells as well. And there's a lot of good use to be done with dead cells. Dead probiotics, in a lot of cases, do a wonderful job of helping support immune health and things, but consumers aren't buying 10 billion dead bacteria. If they're doing that, they should be looking at postbiotics, which is a different topic. But AFU just gives the ability to have a higher count without making sure they're alive. And so the standard now, according to the standard organizations, it still is CFU. There's organizations that are arguing for AFU, but it's just, to me, the gold standard is CFU.
So how many CFU should we be looking for? And I mean, would it depend on the strain? The different strains require different CFUs.
Exactly. That was exactly what I was going to say. So you may have one strain, like let's say we're looking at, some immune marker. We're going to do a test and we're going to test some sort of immune marker to see if it affects the immune system. Some strains, it may take 30 billion CFU every single day for 90 days to move that immune marker from point A to point B. Another strain, it may take 500 million CFU a week. And so what consumers need to be looking for is what does this claim say on the pack, but also what does the science say about that particular strain? So, for example, in my past life, we sold a spore former. It was a Bacillus coagulans, and all of our clinical trials were done at two different levels. 500 million CFU per day, we found that it supported the immune system. So our customers could make immune claims on their package, supports immune health, and consumers could rest assured that it's going to help support their immune health because that's what's in there. At a billion CFU per day, we saw that it also helped support um, protein utilization and also supported digestive health. So, for example, the people who have IBS and things like that, we're finding the sweet spot for us was about 1 billion CFU. We could have put more in, but then it would have added cost to the consumer. And our goal was to have the lowest effective level of the organism so that it could be cost effective. And and we would communicate with our partners that were commercializing food and beverage products. We'd say you put in 500 million CFU per serving, per daily serving, and you can make two claims that it's probiotic because that's a de facto claim, and that it supports immune health. At 1 billion, you could say that it's probiotic, it supports immune health, it also supports digestive health and protein utilization. And so it really depends. And then there's other strains that are kind of similar, and it takes, maybe takes 3 or 4 times as much of that organism to do the same things. It's just really depends on the strain. And the only way to figure it out is to do, good clinical work to figure that out.
So if I'm like an ordinary guy and I'm thinking about taking probiotics, so do I have to go to PubMed? Is there any resources that are more readable?
Yeah, I mean, it really gets to be, thankfully AI has come into our world. And so just the other day we did a little experiment. I had a friend who was having, some digestive issues, and so we just said, hey, let's see what Perplexity was the platform I used. I said, let's see what Perplexity had. And it pulled up a list of consumer products with the strains and links to their published clinical data supporting the health claims and the data. It was so nice to see because there's not really a place, there's not like a repository where consumers can go and see all the probiotics on the market and what they're for. And so, there's kind of a general class of probiotics, consumer products that are what kind of widely accepted is if you're going to take a probiotic and you don't have a specific need, here's this list of probiotics. They all do a great job of supporting digestive and immune health. If you're worried about cholesterol or, mood or things like that, and you're specifically looking to, to use a probiotic for those things, then it requires a little deeper research. Or if you're taking antibiotics, for example, during a course of antibiotics, probiotics don't do you much good, and so you would want to use a yeast-based probiotic when you're on antibiotics. You don't need to stop taking your probiotics because you're going to want to start right back up again. But there's yeast-based probiotics to take while you're on that antibiotic, and they've been shown in dozens of clinical studies to help reduce what's super common, which is antibiotic-associated diarrhea. A lot of people have it. And so by taking, the Sec Boulardii, and the brand name is Floristore, it really does a wonderful job of helping people just kind of feel better when they're on antibiotics, when God forbid they have to go on them.
So I was thinking, so is there like a protocol that you would recommend for someone who has just taken a wide spectrum antibiotic and to
Well,
quickly get the gut back?
yeah, I mean, I'm kind of I go to extremes on things like that. And so typically what I'll do, for example, if I was on antibiotics, I would keep taking the probiotics I'm taking already, and I take a couple different ones. But I would add Floristore, and then so as soon as I went to the pharmacy to pick up the antibiotic, I'd get a box of Floristore. I'd double up, take a double dose of Floristore every day. It says on the package, I think it says take 1 or 2. I would take the two. From that, I would then add a kind of a broad spectrum multi-strain, you know, for a month. I'll typically take like a 50 billion CFU product that has bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, a variety of different strains, so that you can kind of cover, lots of fronts. So you're kind of repopulating your gut with lots of stuff. Also, it's super important to make sure that you're adding fiber and prebiotics, because adding, you have, many times more, bacterial cells in your gut than we have cells in our entire body. We have trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. So thinking that we're going to just take a couple capsules with a billion CFU in it and it's going to be like, ah, good, or my gut's back to normal. That's kind of like saying I got to go fill the swimming pool and walking out of the house with a thimble. You're like, I can do it. It's just going to take a while. And so I typically recommend that people, go with something that's a little bit higher CFU count when you need it, like coming off of antibiotics. Do it for a month or two, and then you can go back to whatever it is you were doing before.
So what biomarkers would you look for to see how your gut is doing?
So that's it's an emerging science right now. So there's several companies out in the marketplace that do pretty nice jobs of analyzing your gut microbiota. The way you do it, it's, you'll send them in a fecal sample and then they send you back a report that says, here's all of the bacteria, and there's one company that actually looks at fungi as well. So it's looking at yeasts and things, which is actually pretty handy. Um, and so, uh, so, so there's not a particular biomarker. It's not like you can go to LabCorp and have them run your immune panel and everything's good. But so for the curious, I encourage people all the time. I encourage people to, go do a microbiome test. They're $100 or a couple $100, and you can look at it. And if you're interested, then you can repeat it after you've gone on some sort of probiotic protocol. And it's really interesting to see how certain people will have pretty big transitions. So, for example, I have a friend who had a very high predominance of a very particular type of yeast in their gut, way higher than they should have had. And so, as odd as this sounds, we put them on a probiotic, but that contains another type of yeast that is known to break down what's called biofilms. And so it's the stuff that makes bacteria stick to the inside of your intestines. And so within 90 days, he had a absolute profound change in his gut microbiota, and he's now no longer experiencing the pretty severe GI symptoms that he was experiencing for several years before that. And it just turned out that he had an overgrowth of a particular strain of Candida, a type of yeast in his gut, and by getting rid of some of that stuff and reestablishing some other organisms, it turned him around. But so microbiome testing is a useful thing for the curious.
Right, but you'd have to do most of the kind of detective work yourself. Would the
So you'll get a
companies do?
report. Often the reports are getting better and better. They'll say, a lot of the testing companies are also probiotic companies, and so they'll be like, hey, you could take our product X and Y, and there's usually pretty good science behind it, and so you're not gonna have to. It's not like if you download your own genetic data and you're like, okay, I'm gonna see what's going on, and you try to use one of the free services to look at your genetic data. It's just you just shake your head because it's so complex. With the microbiome data, the companies that are doing the testing right now are doing a really nice job of making consumer-friendly reports. They're not really geared towards clinicians. It's geared more towards consumers. And most of the good companies also have like somebody that you can talk to afterwards to go through your results if you want.
So you did talk about your was it your friend who got whose gut microbiome actually changed. So that would imply some colonization. So is
Yeah.
that normally what you see, or is it only transient? Because you said you should take one every day. I mean,
Yeah,
if
I
it
mean,
was
I mean, there's some controversy about whether or not colonization is colonization, because the epithelial cells in your gut are always sloughing off. I mean, we're always turning over cells, and if they're sticking to those cells, if you have a bacteria that's sitting on an epithelial cell and that cell gets sloughed off, you need to replace it. They're also duplicating or replicating very quickly. The bacteria grows quickly in your gut, and so, but colonization is one of those things. It's a debate. I've heard people say, we gave someone a probiotic 22 years ago and we can still test them for it, which to me means it's probably in the environment somewhere. But if you think about something that replicates genetically that quickly, I don't know if you want it hanging around in your body for the rest of your life. There's always some sort of genetic mutation that can happen when something's, doing binary division. Every once in a while, something goes wrong. And I don't want something in me that's going to be there forever that may go bad along the way because, new bacterial species or, become new bacterial species because for whatever reason they had to evolve. And when things are growing as quickly as a bacteria grows, evolution happens pretty quickly. And so you don't want it to evolve the wrong way. And so, which is we always liked our particular organism was completely transient. It didn't have the ability to form biofilms, and so you had to take it every day. And so, but it also had no chance of sticking around.
Interesting. So there will be different strains would have different possibilities of whether they would be able to like colonize or not.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah, different strains have different abilities to adhere to epithelial cells, and so you'll have some strains that are really good colonizers, and you'll have other ones that are just completely transient, and they're just depending upon your transit time, just every 2 or 3 days they're gone.
Would there be any way of telling that without looking it up in PubMed?
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, you can. Well, that's a little trickier, but but again, there's no organism that you can take once and you're good. And so it's kind of like it's just like anything. If you find something that works, stick with it. Don't, probiotics are one of those things. Just like don't overdo it, don't underdo it, and use clinically studied strains and make sure they're labeled appropriately. And you're not going to find something that's typically, unless you have something already, going on wrong, you don't have to really worry about the safety or things like that. And so, without having to become, citizen scientists and learning all about PubMed. I mean, your average person doesn't know what PubMed is, and
Yeah.
so going in there and then, even science types, you look at PubMed and you're like, this particular paper is confusing. And so I think that we really have to depend on the companies that are selling us the products, and they should be open and transparent about the organisms they're using, what they do, and if they're not, it's probably a reason.
Okay. So then what I'm kind of hearing is maybe the best way would be if you have some symptoms, constipation, whatever, um, put them into something like Perplexity or ChatGPT, get at least an initial view of what some of the strains are that would be helpful, and then go and find a good producer for those, which goes down to the strain level.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You may find that you're like, hey, Culturelle checks all my boxes or whatever the particular product is. And, it's kind of once you find something that works, stick with it, and it's kind of like a no harm can be done so long as you're a healthy individual and you're not, suffering from bacterial overgrowth or something like that.
Right. And it sounds like even if you overdosed, you wouldn't get bacterial overgrowth because like the
Yeah.
CFUs are so small.
It's funny, the people when I hear somebody say, well, I took a probiotic and it made me, bloated and made me this and made me that, which happens. Some people are super sensitive. But now when you get into the world of prebiotics and things like that, you certainly do know when you took too much. Believe me, it's because they're feeding the bacteria. So prebiotics are fundamentally what probiotics eat. And so you can really overdo it on prebiotics if you're just getting started. But with probiotics, just take as suggested by the manufacturer and you should be okay. Because it's usually when you do your grass work, when you file your regulatory grass, you have an estimated daily intake, and typically that is significantly higher than what a consumer is going to take anyway.
Do you so when you're taking probiotics, do you take a prebiotic with it? Do you take it after? I mean, how would you encourage the probiotic to have the best effect?
So I take a prebiotic um, every day just because, but I also take a specific prebiotic because I don't like taking grams and grams of things. And so there's some prebiotics that are effective at small doses and that don't produce as many side effects. There's others like inulin, for example. A lot of people tend to be sensitive to it. Your dosages are in the 5 to 15 grams per day range. And if you meet somebody and this morning they take 15 grams of inulin and you meet them in the afternoon, you're probably going to have a conversation about they're not feeling so great that day, and so, but but prebiotics are, there's a lot of talk about fiber, and not all prebiotics are fiber, and not all fibers are prebiotics, um, but it's really beneficial to have, obviously a balanced diet is incredibly important, and having healthy sources of prebiotics is a great way to really help your gut bacteria. I mean, you can make pretty good strides with prebiotics and probiotics combined. And there's some prebiotics that you'll see a probiotic that'll have a prebiotic with it. They'll go, they'll work together, they'll be in the same product. And so typically it's a smaller dose of the prebiotics, so you're not going to get any side effect. But typically the probiotic company hopefully has looked to see that this particular prebiotic will help this particular probiotic grow optimally.
Okay, so yeah, so like psyllium husk as a would be a prebiotic.
Psyllium is more of a fiber that's used just it's more of a broom than a fiber that's really consumed by the so if you're looking at prebiotics, you'll be looking at things like inulin, and then then there's a whole bunch of oligosaccharides. So you'll see ZOS, XOS, or FOS, FOS. You'll see now HMOs, which are human milk derived oligosaccharides. And so, like I said, not all fibers or not all fiber-like things have prebiotic properties. You have to have, and so they'll be a wise company will label their fiber as prebiotic if it's prebiotic, because one, it gives them a premium in the marketplace because you charge more for a prebiotic than you can for fiber, but also it shows that they've done the work to show that there's been clinical work done about the fact that this prebiotic actually does provide a benefit. And it's like I said, a whole separate conversation around prebiotics and postbiotics, but prebiotics, not a bad thing to add to your daily regime if you can. And a lot of people can just, there's lots of ways to get them in your diet and things like that as well.
So turning to the future, so where do you see the research in probiotics at the moment? I mean, AI is there being any genetically modified bacteria
Sure.
used?
Yeah, there's genetically modified organisms that are about to hit the market. The thing that we've seen over the last number of years is there's been a consolidation in the industry where there's a lot of work being done right now around really metabolite specific probiotics. One, for example, was discovered. This particular company was looking for a probiotic that produced GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA. So they screened using, AI and high throughput screening 200 million strains of probiotics, the probiotic bacteria, you know, and they found several. Then they were able to test them, and they found one organism that in the gut produces 100 milligrams of GABA. It's amazing. So the nice thing is it's been shown in now 2 clinical trials to reduce stress and anxiety in companion animals and the human trials running. It's and so 200 million different strains they sorted through to find this. And fortunately, we've now got the computing power where we can do those kinds of things. And so I think that the future is the very condition specific probiotics, genetically modifying organisms to do things. For example, there's a company that I'm actually affiliated with. They've genetically modified a spore former to not go into its spore form because when it's when it's active in the stomach is where they want it to be active. It produces an enzyme, and that enzyme breaks down the material that causes kidney stones. And so it's a strange but brilliant and elegant approach to, producing this enzyme that's super frail. I couldn't just give you the enzyme, but I can give you this organism that will produce the enzyme in the stomach and in the gut and will, reduce your incidences of kidney stones. And so we're also seeing where they've taken some organisms that may potentially have been, they may have been, not the greatest organism when it comes to pathogenic potential. So Clostridiums, for example, we've all heard of C. diff and Clostridium. Well, there's some Clostridium out there that are fabulous organisms for human consumption. And what we need to do is we need to genetically modify it just to take that part of the organism that could potentially cause problems in an immunocompromised person. You just take it out. You use CRISPR and you just pull that section of the genome out, then test it, and you do all your standard safety testing, and you take it to market just like you would an ordinary food ingredient. And so, but you'll start seeing there's one that I know of, maybe two. There's a company called ZBiotics that genetically modified an organism, and it's funny, it's used to prevent hangovers. But they, I believe, were one of the first genetically modified probiotics for human consumption. And they're on the market now and available.
I wonder how it prevents hangovers. Interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting it metabolizes the acetaldehyde, or I'm not it's not my specialty, but it's a metabolic process that it does.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, interesting. Yes. That should be a bestseller. Um, okay. Is there any strain? What strain are you most excited about?
From a generic let from just
Hmm.
if someone asks me what should I take, I say there's let's just call it 3 strains that are available in every store in America and they're available internationally. Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. It's in a product called Culturelle. It's been around a long time. Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG is the most studied probiotic ever in the world. I mean, it has thousands of published clinical studies on this one organism. Um, Great product. There's the product there's a product sold by Procter& Gamble called Align that is also a very nice, great digestive probiotic for daily use. And then on the spore former side, the company that we used to run is now owned by Reckitt Benckiser, and they have a product called Digestive Advantage, and that's a spore former, so it's a very stable organism, and so that's also one that provides really good general probiotic coverage, digestive, immune, some metabolic benefits, and so I kind of look for you know the the bifidobacteria that's in the Align, um, Lactobacillus GG that's in Culturelle, or Bacillus coagulans GBI 30 that's in, it's also known as BC 30, that is in bunches of food products and also the Digestive Advantage line of supplements. And so, but there's also thousands of other great strains that do, there's BB12, which you'll see in lots of yogurts and things like that. It's a bifidobacteria that's strain designation is BB12. The NCFM acidophilus that I mentioned. So there's a couple dozen what you would call top tier, really premium, well studied, well characterized, deep in the market probiotics that people continue to do really good clinical work around.
Can you patent strains?
You used to be able to, and you no longer can patent organisms, but you can patent the use or the formulation. So you may be able to patent, I'm going to put a combination together that's a prebiotic, this strain and that strain, and it does that. So you may be able to patent that. But you can no longer patent the strains themselves. And so, but there's ways that companies can protect themselves so that, because otherwise, you come up with some great discovery and somebody steals it the next day, because it's pretty easy to go to the grocery store and buy a box of pills and grow that organism. And so there's protections out there related to intellectual property, clinical work, trademarks, and things like that.
Okay, thank you. So we talked about a number of resources. I mean, kind of in summary, if people want to know more, I mean, they want to think about how they're going to get started with probiotics, where could they go?
I would say start with the International Probiotics Association. There's lots of resources on their website. If you feel like really being nerding out on things, you can go to the ISAP, and it's ISAPP website. But the International Probiotics Association is a really good place for consumers to go to kind of get started. If they want to look at individual products to see, is what's in this bottle, or what's supposed to be in there. Consumer Labs is a great resource for a whole variety of different ingredients. And they'll also give you a pretty good deep dive into, this particular organism has been shown to do these things, or, even outside of probiotics, they do a very nice job of kind of showing what things do, and they'll let you know if there's warning letters from the FDA, all kinds of stuff. It's a great resource.
Excellent. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Happy to talk to you. It's really nice talking to you.